Hello. So, in this episode of S&M Basics, I want to talk about meditation. So, meditation has many uses, many benefits. So this will be a very concise video. So if I don't mention something, it just didn't come up. Meditation is a broad subject. There are many different stages, many different ways to meditate, and I'll try to go over a lot of it. So starting off, there's two main uh, methods of meditation. One being what I call mindfulness, and then mindlessness. Only in context of what I'm talking about do I use those words. In that you're intentionally filling yourself with certain thoughts in order to fill yourself with those aspects, or you're emptying yourself, releasing information out of your soul, to somewhat turn yourself into like an empty vessel, turning into a state of nothingness. So mindlessness is that nothingness state that I'm talking about, but mindfulness, in the context of what I'm talking about, would be the intentional filling of one's thoughts, intentional filling of one's soul with certain thoughts. And that goes in, so both of them I'd say are beneficial, but for different reasons. So talking about mindful meditation, I like to use the example that Cobus van Rensburg used when he talked about meditation. He liked to use the metaphor of a cow, and how it chews cud, and that it'll chew and then it'll swallow and digest, and it'll bring it back up, chew it some more, and then digest it again, and bring it back up and digest it again, and it keeps doing that. And that's really a decent picture of this mindful state that I'm talking about, in which you continuously consume. You are constantly digesting certain thoughts. Now, this goes into a proper mental diet. We think about natural health, we think about our diet as one of the main things that go into that trinity. The trinity of natural health being diet, exercise, and rest. Similarly, as far as our soul's health, our souls require a special diet, but that diet isn't made up of vegetables or meat or anything like that. That diet for our soul is made up of our thoughts. Because the same is true in every realm, in that you become what you consume. So as you begin to take out a certain portion of your day and just begin to think good thoughts, simply put, you'll begin to experience the manifestations of those thoughts, because that is what you're feeding your soul. Your soul will begin to function like what you give the most thought and attention to. So if you want to become a more blissful being, you start to think bliss, and eventually you will become bliss. You want to grow in love, you need to first start thinking in terms of love. And eventually that will transform you into something that has love as a base state, that has bliss as a base state, that has kindness and joy and peace and all those other attributes as a base state. Something that doesn't need to be invoked or provoked, but that's just what you are now. Those are casual manifestations, because those are the qualities of your soul now. So that's a starting point, is that by intentionally meditating on things, by filling our souls with certain thoughts, we can access certain realms. If you want to begin to function in divine healing, if you begin to saturate your mind in thoughts about healings and life, and you go out and you read a bunch of testimonies and you research a whole bunch, it's not necessarily that those books and those teachings and so on and so forth are laced with impartation. While some of them may be, it's not that they're laced with impartation, is that you're intentionally feeding your soul that, by the oversaturation of that information. Therefore, you start to change your outlook on creation, in that when you come across someone with an infirmity, because you've been feeding your soul healing, and things related to that topic, you now believe that you can do it, and therefore you're able to. You find it a bit easier than before. At the very least, you find yourself thinking about what you should be doing, which is a great step. If you went from not believing it was possible to now somewhat convicting yourself of not being active in that area. So if you that really works in a bunch of different categories. Anything that you want to learn, if you dedicate time to focusing on only that and you kind of isolate with just that, you'll come out a master of it. Because you'll begin to become it. Your soul will sculpt itself in such a way that will enable proper use of whatever that concept is. So let's talk about mindlessness, stepping out of the intentional focusing or the intentional feeling of your soul with something, but instead the intentional emptying. I'm going to do my best to try to describe this. So, in the natural world, we take showers, we take baths, and that's so that we can clean our natural body. And this is something that should be done like every day. It should be done fairly often. But a question I like to ask people is, when's the last time you cleaned your soul? We clean bodies daily, at least we should be. But souls, most people don't think about it. And this is one of the important factors. This is one of the problems that shows up, and I'm going to provide the solution, of course, is that people are typically carrying with them years and decades of soulish trauma, soulish hurt, soulish baggage that instead of getting rid of as you would dirt from a day, they've been keeping with them for decades. So oftentimes what you're experiencing when you interact with another person, or you might even be the person that has difficulty in certain interactions, is the baggage coming up, or the inability to function past your hurt, your trauma. You find yourself reacting from a more inner poison, if I would call it that. And that's simply because your soul hasn't had a bath, where you're still carrying things from long ago, and there, because it is the soul, it is sculpting the way that you process information, that you receive and you release information. I call these filters, but not all filters are related to this. But the way that you get, one of the ways that you get rid of this is by entering into this state of meditation called mindlessness. Well, even mindfulness will help, but I found that the mindlessness, the nothingness, tends to help a whole lot more when it comes to clearing out the soul. Because usually when people think about the soul, they think mind, will, and emotions, but the soul is much bigger than that, and the mind and the heart are triune organs that exist in the body, the soul, and the spirit, so they're not even bound to the soul, even though the characteristics of them are more engaged in that realm. They're not bound to it. But one of the main things about the soul is that that is the part of our anatomy that stores information and processes information. That's the main characteristic of the soul, which means that everything that happens to you gets stored in your soul. Every bit of information, whether you believe it's true or false, gets stored in your soul as a default. Now, as you begin to grow and take more authority and you start to be a bit more intentional with the usage of your soul, you can intentionally clear out a lot of this stuff. And that's what I'm talking about here. There's a state in which you can enter into as you begin to kind of just fade off. And many of us have done this by accident and scared ourselves, where we find ourselves kind of blanked out, unfocused in the natural world, but in some sort of mental state. And oftentimes it feels like you're being pulled back or you're being pulled up, or sometimes you might feel like you're falling. Now, this isn't a spiritual phenomenon, but this is more of a soulish phenomenon, in that you're being drawn into your soulish realm. You're beginning to see from your soul and experience from your soul. And as confusing as those moments may be, oftentimes they bring a lot of clarity with them. That's because when you begin to shift into that nothingness state, where you're not thinking about anything and you're just allowing your mind, in a sense, to regulate and deal with itself apart, it's kind of like you go into a state where you're no longer receiving information. Now you get to sift through and process the information that you've been storing for however long. And these two types of meditation in general, I say, is the best exercise for soul health. But this is how you help to get rid of some of the nonsense that you don't want in your soul. This is one of the ways to get rid of filters, is to give your soul time to heal itself. Not by intentionally feeding it something, but by refusing to give it anything and allowing it to sort through and process what's already there. That's why oftentimes when people are recovering from addiction, or they're recovering from abuse, or whatever their trauma may be, or their manifestation of trauma may be, oftentimes, should they find themselves meditating, they'll notice that they'll start to be a lot healthier. They'll start to be a lot calmer. They'll get that mental peace that they were looking for. And this is apart from any relationship to God. This is just a faculty of our soul, because this is what it's meant to do. And it's universal that meditation is healthy. And this is why. When you give the soul time to heal itself, really, just like when you fast, and I've talked about that in another S&M Basics, but pretty much when you fast, you're giving your body time to heal itself. Typically, it's trying to get rid of the food that it already has in it. So when you go for, at the very least, 24 hours, you give your body time to kind of sift through and get rid of a lot more than it otherwise would have. And should it find no food, it'll then start to rid the body of the toxins within it and expel those as well. But it doesn't get to do that if you eat every day, especially if you eat a lot every day. Its only focus is on getting rid of food. Same thing with the soul, in that if you never give your soul time to empty itself or relieve itself of wastes, you'll carry those wastes with you. In the natural, there's people who's technically been carrying food in their system for years that never made its way out. In similar fashion, people are carrying thoughts, they're carrying memories, they're carrying trauma with them for years that never made its way out because they never gave it time to leave. They never gave it a chance because they were always receiving and receiving and receiving, never taking a moment to relax. And this is often one of the symptoms that causes people to be restless in the night, in which they cannot sleep, or they sleep but they do not get rest, is because there's still too much going on in their soul. Even if they're able to put their body down, their soul is still in need of help. Their soul is still carrying some traumatic stuff, or just too much stuff. It doesn't even have to be traumatic. Many people notice that their thoughts become kind of scatterbrained and erratic after they listen to a lot of music. So there's a lot of people that I know that don't listen to music often at all, because it takes them out of this clear mental state. Now, backing out of the benefits of meditation and just being a mystic for a moment, meditation comes with many different stages. If we're talking mindfulness, in that type of meditation, as I described earlier, one of the major end goals is transfiguration, in that you literally become, to the fullest extent, whatever it is that you're meditating on. So if you've been following me or being connected to me or in fellowship with me for any amount of time, you know that life, light, and truth are the pretty much banner of Cave of Mystery. So if you were to engage life, and you engage light, and you engage truth, you, to that extent, it's the possibility that you can physically turn into those abstract concepts, into those entities yourself, where you merge with them on an identity level. but not just on a internal identity level, but you will physically transform into that, where your skin is life, your skin is truth, your very essence is light. That's one of the major manifestations of mindful, is that you filled yourself to the point of becoming. You've dieted yourself. You've consumed yourself into transformation. Now, one of the major manifestations of mindlessness is bliss. Bliss is one of the main stages. I believe that the Hindus call it samadhi. And there's even several different layers within samadhi. And I don't want to talk about all of that, but bliss. Now, the thing is, it's not just a state to hit and then come back down from, even though the frequent hitting of that state or the frequent acquiring of that state is beneficial. I'd say a more proper goal would be to learn to live from that mental state of bliss so that you become a blessing. I believe bliss is where the word blessing comes from. So everything you do is an uplifting of what's around you, where you carry the contagious high-level frequency of bliss with you and impart it into every area you have influence. Where instead of really worrying about something bringing you down, you are the high tide that lifts all boats. So that's one of the main things that I would recommend. If you like the highest mental state that you're able to access, and this comes with time, this comes with practice, but the highest mental state that you find yourself able to access, I recommend learning to live there instead of visit there frequently. And that goes for any other state. If you're, there are natural states that I'll talk about eventually, some of which I've already talked about on Patreon, link in the description. Certain spiritual states, like instead of having the anointing be something that you simply access whenever you're trying to do something, learn to live in an anointed state. That's something I talked about in my book, and I believe I've also talked about on Patreon. So, but learning to live from that high state, the highest state that you can access, learn to live from there instead of only visiting there. If I wanted to use scripture, they that dwell in the secret place, not they that visit, you know? But that's one of the main things. But the other, I'd say the highest level of that is the complete dissolving of oneself into the collective consciousness of the astral world or the soulish world. Astral, soulish, psyche, it's the same thing. So hopefully none of those words freak y'all out. If you're talking about the soul, you're talking about the astral body, you're talking about the psychic body. It's the same thing. Is that it's believed by many different cultures that humanity really has access to one large soul of information, kind of like the internet. In that there's this large collective of infinite knowledge, infinite wisdom, and infinite understanding, and we're just pieces of it. And we have the ability, should we choose to practice in that way, to somewhat access that cloud of information. Some cultures call it the Akashic records. And there's different names for it, but the concept itself exists in a lot of different cultures, in which there is this massive bank of information, infinite information, that can be accessed by the soul. So I'd say the highest state of the mindlessness is where you've detached so much from the external world and begin to identify with the soulish world, in that your soul begins to dissolve into that collective astral cloud of information, where you start to lose your soul in the great soul. I believe that term there is Paramaatman. So you start to lose yourself in the great, supreme, all unifying soul of the astral world. So one ends up with you turning into something. The other ends with you, in a sense, becoming nothing, but not lacking anything. I've said a lot, and I don't want to draw this video out too long. So if you have questions, please leave them in the comment section down below. If you'd like to contact me directly, email me at caveofm@gmail.com. If you want to access more of my teachings than what I put on YouTube, check the description. There is my Patreon link, and you can always come and talk to us in the Discord channel. So that's it for this one. Later.